All right, thanks for clicking there. I am Mike Hartman, and the other guy is Michael Fragoso, who was appointed in early March a fellow in the program on the Constitution, the courts, and culture at the Ethics and Public Policy Center uh, in Washington, D.C. He is also an attorney in private practice. For the fellowship, he writes and speaks on issues relating to the law, the judiciary, and Congress. Uh, Before these gigs, roles, he was a chief counsel in the office of the Republican leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, where he worked on several issues, among them judicial nominations. And I think that's what we'd like to see if we can talk to him about today, including the role of nonprofits uh, in that process. Well, first, Mike, let's just talk about your new job at a think tank. What do you think of the place so far?
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike. Great to see you again. It's a lot of fun at the think tank. It's just sort of a lot of freedom to sort of opine on things that I want to in ways that I think might be helpful. Um, Field calls from policymakers that I know who have questions about things. And I mean, that's always when I was in government, that always struck me as sort of their best use is for them to just be a resource for the people who are trying to make the decisions to move the country in a direction or another.
hmm What's the breakdown of your time between the fellowship and, well, the practice? Depends, does it, on clients or
Yeah, I mean they're both kind of cyclical, I guess. So I'm full time at my law firm and then part time at EPPC. It's sort of my side gig, but with both of them, like there's work to get done, and you get it done. And sometimes it's busier, sometimes it's less. So, start of a new presidential administration, starting to roll out judges hopefully soon. That's a lot more sort of demands on the think tank side. But then, say we go into a litigation or have to really step up whatever we're doing at the firm, like that'll take priority. And so I think it's kind of a good mix because they are both, you know, the kinds of jobs where you can move to one when the other's slack and move to the other when the first one's slack. And as long as you're getting it done, nobody really cares.
now, Mike, as a consumer of your work product and that of your think tank, I thought I detected a burst of activity immediately post announcement of the fellowship. Did you have those in the bank, or is this? I mean, it didn't seem to me like you were part-time. Did you have a file of things you were ready to go with once you took this role?
Not really. Really, ever since I left Leader McConnell's office, I've just sort of, as issues have appealed to me, sat down and written about them.
Yeah.
And then there's just been a lot going on in recent weeks. And so as stuff sort of comes across my desk, I'll write about it. And then, in 6 months, if I'm asked, well, what have you done lately? I can point to early March.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Okay, good. Then getting to one of those pieces of work product, as it were, or results of your work, and what we both mentioned, the judicial nomination process. You wrote recently, one of your first things out of the box, I think, was about the ABA. And I won't characterize it. I'll let you do that. But why do they have the role they have in the judicial nomination process? I guess if you could briefly describe what it is and why it's more special than others' roles.
so they've had a role in the judicial nominations process, I think going back to the Eisenhower administration. And back in the old days, like administrations would tell the ABA who they were thinking of nominating to judgeships, and then the ABA would rate them by talking to judges and peers. And the idea was if the ABA found the person not qualified, then he or she wouldn't be nominated, and it would just sort of all go away quietly. And if they were qualified, then it would bolster their candidacy, starting with George W. Bush, because the ABA had just drifted far to the left. Bush stopped them getting the names ahead of time. There were also allegations in the 80s that, some of the people that they checked on with these names were liberal activists. And so then they got to sort of build out their Oppo files on judicial nominees. So Bush didn't do it. Obama brought them back. When Trump came in, he got rid of them again. And then Biden kept them gone because there were actually complaints on the progressive left that the ABA tends to be kind of civil defense focused. And so they were biased against public defenders and non-traditional careers and things like that. And so if you look at Biden's nominees, they were very public defender heavy, and I think the ABA not really being part of the process was part of the thinking there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I
And
wrote
your
an article
recommendation
basically
is,
saying that
your recommendation, get them out of it, get them out of the
just get
process.
them out of it entirely. They're still part of the process a little bit, like the Department of Justice sends them the questionnaires. They tell nominees to sign waivers so that they can find information about ethics complaints against them. They sit for like a 2-hour interview where they're told all the things people say about them. And so my recommendation was that the Department of Justice just stop all of that, because in the last few months, and then also during the Biden administration, the ABA just demonstrated that it's not a reliable partner on anything for the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, as a technical matter, the ABA is a nonprofit, but not a C3. Uh,
Yep.
what other nonprofits thinking now about the C3s play a role? I guess a C4 too, or C4 play a role in the nominating process.
Yeah,
And
I don't know which are C3s and which are C4s, but on the right,
telling in itself, by the way, a telling observation in itself, I would say. But okay, I'm so sorry.
you've got the Judicial Crisis Network, Article 3 Project, First Liberty Institute's gotten pretty involved in this stuff. Americans for Prosperity has been involved for a while. EPPC, I'm now involved in it. Ed Whalen's been involved in it for a while, my colleague there. The Heritage Foundation has some people in this space, like Tom Jipping and John Malcolm. And then the Federal Society has always sort of been in the background, but they very assiduously don't get involved in any particular matters. So they don't promote any nominees, they don't take a position on legislation, but they're sort of the pipeline for the people who are operating in this space. And look, a lot of this constellation of organizations was really, fostered by Leonard Leo's nonprofit activities while he was at the Federalist Society and then since. And then sort of on the left, you've got legacy nonprofits like People for the American Way, the Lawyers Committee for Civil and Human Rights, the Alliance for Justice, the American Constitution Society. Unlike Federal Society, which doesn't get involved in anything, American Constitutional Society is very active and very partisan. And then the more recent development you have is the Arabella Network, which is this sort of constellation of C3s and C4s and for-profit entities all sort of working together to advance progressive goals. And they set up this group called Demand Justice, which was a real big player probably over the last 8 years. And then they sponsored a group called Fix the Court, which I believe is a C3 and is no longer tied to Arabella, but I think it was sort of germinated there.
Mhm.
Those are sort of the main ones on the left.
Mm-hmm. Is it your, this is difficult to determine. Is it even? Are there as many groups on the left as on the right, or are the resources that go to those on the left roughly equivalent to those that go on the right, whether the number of groups might be the same or not?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. In terms of number of groups, it's probably the same. My guess would be that traditionally the liberal groups are better capitalized than the conservative groups, although again, Leonard has done really good work in sort of bridging that gap. But the other thing they have in this space is all of these liberal groups have traditionally strong connections with big law in ways that sort of serve as a force multiplier almost for what they're trying to do. Now, maybe that's changing with Trump. He's, Paul Weiss probably would have been one of the firms that's very much aligned with, the Alliance for Justice and the Lawyers Committee. And now they are publicly saying that they're not going to overtly oppose the president's agenda, probably absent client request. So that's a structural advantage the left has traditionally had that I might not have anymore. We'll see.
Hmm. Uh, what is it? First, we'll do legally, and then like politically or practically. What is it appropriate for these groups to do in terms of offering advice and guidance to congressional staff, or by the way, contributing to public discourse? What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, if there's C3s in particular, they have to be careful with how much lobbying they do. Either so in judicial nominations for or against specific judicial candidates, I think is probably the main way that that could come up. Also, for and against specific legislation is another way that could come up. But I think they, again, sort of what I said at the outset, their most helpful purpose is just educating the public on what's happening when it comes to judicial nominations, and then also just having the resources necessary to help educate policymakers in that space. So, some examples. Carrie Severino at JCN is really good at sort of contextualizing nominees' records, especially pushing back on stuff Democrats say about them, or when the shoe's on the other foot, pointing out why these records are bad and the Democrats are covering them up. Tom Jipping at Heritage just has a wealth of knowledge on sort of the statistics of the judiciary. Goes back to when he was working for Senator Hatch, and I knew him there when he'd show up at our meetings and have all the numbers just at the tip of his fingers. He's still doing that, and it's useful. And I remember when I was on judiciary and my successors there, when they need those numbers, they know who to call.
Hmm. And these groups can run ads and during, well, whenever, but they often do run ads, don't they, during confirmation hearings?
They do. It depends on when they do, but yeah, they've JCN ran ads for against a few of our guys under Biden that we were trying to hit, and then for a bunch of our folks under Trump. I think they also ran ads against Merrick Garland for not protecting the Supreme Court justices' houses.
Yeah,
Uh, and that was, we were trying to make hay of that one. And
yeah,
he used to be these people's colleague, so he probably felt a little bad about it. And so those were interesting ads.
yeah.